expecting anything specific. But
For sure.
what's been going on with you, man? What things have been catching your eye lately?
I've been following the Apple Pro Vision Pro came out, so I've been checking that out. Mostly tech stuff, and actually haven't been doing so much politics stuff lately. How about yourself?
I've just been busy working. I did listen to a Lex Friedman podcast with
Mm,
Ben Shapiro and Destiny.
right.
Do
Interesting.
you know who Destiny is?
I don't recall Destiny. Of course, I know Ben Shapiro.
Destiny is a liberal political commentator.
Mm,
I feel like Destiny and Ben Shapiro have a lot of very similar qualities. They're very quick witted. They both talk very fast.
mm,
Their computing power seems to be, always at that rev limiter.
mm-hmm.
Uh, it was a very interesting conversation, and I think it was one of those that like more people should be having because they even at the end were complimenting each other and
Mm,
talked about how they enjoyed it. And there was a lot of things that they agreed upon that you would assume with the general atmosphere that they would have been more at each other's throats
mm.
versus finding things that they agreed upon and then just things where they just were open about just not agreeing but not almost insulting the other in a way.
I think that's to me a representation of America today. Uh, when we're often pitted against each other politically, I think the average American will often find a lot in common with the one on the other side, so to
Yeah.
speak. And it's often media and others and politicians that benefit from pitting us against each other, way more than actual the things that we have quite a bit in common. And then there's a few often just small areas that we disagree, but there's a lot of daily life and daily ways of living that we actually, on average, would agree with and have in common. So it's those little sticking points, and they can, inflame those sticking points pretty substantially. But it sounds like in that case, they're on opposite ends of pretty extreme ends of the political spectrum, and they still had a lot of common ground. And I think a lot of Americans would find that they're in that same boat if they thought about it and started to talk to somebody on the other side.
Oh yeah. Nope. It was a cool conversation. It was 2.5 hours. So I was listening to it when I drove to the ranch and then drove home from the
Mm.
ranch. Because nothing better to do than just listen to a podcast when you're driving an hour,
Oh,
15, hour and a half
for sure,
one way.
podcasts are perfect for that driving.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. To me, I'm sure there's people who just jam out, listen to music, but to me, any sort of road trip, it's podcast,
Mm-hmm. For sure.
you know, of some fashion or another.
Podcast wild popularity is reflected in that you can still be doing other stuff and still listen in on it, and so you don't have to stop everything you're doing like TV to watch it. Say that there was a film of that same thing. That's a 2 hour thing you'd have to sit down and watch. Can't really do much else in that time period if you want to, know what's going on. So podcasts are huge for a reason, for sure. No
Yep.
doubt
Nope.
about
I
it.
can completely agree. So fill me in on what's going on with Apple.
Uh, the Vision Pro came out. I think
Yeah.
pre-orders came out just the other day, and they did sell out, but they didn't make a huge amount of units compared to the iPhone. I think it was two batches of like 10,000 or something like that. Because these puppies are VR headsets and AR headsets that cost $3,500 a piece. Astronomical compared to other ones. For example, the Quest 3 is $499. So it's literally, many times more than just one Quest thing. some of the advantages are pretty good. I do like the one thing that's really transformative that Apple has brought to the table is before you'd always need controllers or some kind of handset that the things would detect. And in this case, you're just using your hands. So it's the next stage of the VR tech where you can it can pick up what you're doing on screen interactively, but you're only using your hands. And oftentimes you look at the thing on the screen and then tap your fingers together like that, and that acts as like a mouse click. And so it's definitely a next stage. With that said, there's still a lot of issues, and I think we've talked about this before with VR. Is there's some amazing transformative experiences. There's these things like 360 videos where there's a lake in Russia that's an incredible, fascinating lake, and the camera's 360, so you can actually record footage all around simultaneously. And being able to see that in VR and then look around and be able to see that is truly, I've had some amazing experiences seeing nature and being on top of some of the mountains, like in the Austrian Alps, and looking down on the valleys below. Just incredible. But they're just not ready for consumer. They're not on a phone or laptop level yet. They just simply aren't. They're just, there's amazing experiences, but they're still a little too techy. And one thing that's coming up with the Vision Pro is that it's a little too heavy still. And that's a common problem with a lot of VR headsets. Most of the time, if you regularly use it, both your disorientation, like your dizziness, as well as your neck will get stronger, so you'll get used to it. But like a phone or something, it needs to be really easy to use right off the bat for most people to adopt it. And it simply has some barriers to entry, like it's heavy to wear until your neck gets strong enough, as well as that a lot of people get dizzy when they first use it because it's disorienting. It's like another reality overlaid on your own, and you're moving, but your body doesn't feel that it's moving. So that disconnect causes disorientation. But you quickly, like anything, most humans will adapt pretty quick. So oftentimes if you keep using it, but they'll use it for 15 minutes, don't like it, never use it again. And that still is a big barrier to adoption until they get it really much lighter and much more seamless in the visuals. But 3,500 is also so steep that itself is a pretty big barrier. With that said, both batches sold out. Now, whether bots bought them to then resell them on eBay, that's the real question that the tech people are talking about right now. Is they are seeing some headsets that are now 10,000 on eBay. So we got to wonder if scalpers got a hold of the main units, but time will tell.
How many units was in their release?
I think I could be wrong, but I think I saw an article that said 2 batches of 10,000. Now, of course, you can compare that to Apple's iPhones, which make millions per year, but they expected as much. At 3,500, there's only going to be a limited amount of people that would get one anyways. Yeah, I mean, from some tech people are super psyched. They're all getting one. I could never justify it, but there's definitely people out there getting them. And now it's just a question of whether scalpers bought up a bunch that weren't necessarily just for consumers to use. But either way, they're selling well. So they didn't just sit on the shelves, all the units. So that's interesting. Even at $3,500 a piece.
I mean, I'm sure you agree. Apple is not dumb. They probably have some sort of strategic plan behind just such a limited number of their price point. Because it was this month that they actually surpassed Samsung in the largest cell phone retailer in the world.
For sure. Yeah, Apple's success is there for a reason, and I'm sure they well planned out exactly how many units that they could expect from the demand.
Yeah.
And but 10,000, and 20,000 maybe at most, and it could even be more, but it's significantly less than iPhone. Just goes to show that the VR market has a long way to go before it's a mass adoption of any kind.
Yeah, because in Quest is owned by Facebook, right? Or Meta?
It is. Mm-hmm. Yep, Meta.
How many, off the top of your head, do you remember their last with the Quest 3, how many they sold?
I don't. That's a good question, but it's, compared to say a laptop or other computer hardware, I do recall hearing it's significantly less for
Yeah.
sure.
But I mean, just like all things, before there's the mass adoption, there's only going to be a couple people who own a Nintendo,
Right.
until it's in every young kid's household.
That's always how it goes. That's doubly so with any tech. Um, And like I said, there's some really great experiences on it. You can go to Machu Picchu and actually see the ruins for yourself in 3D, and
Yes.
you look around. And these kind of experiences, for education purposes, for just improving your life in terms of educating yourself, it's very useful. It's going to be a very powerful tool going forward. Uh, but it's not there yet. The tech has a long way to go to get light enough to where it's really useful on a scale that a lot of people would use it regularly. It's still a big. You're basically wearing like a big brick on the front of your head, and it's it can be a little much. Not to mention, a lot of people they look silly doing it. So if you got them down to a point with AR glasses specifically that looked about more or less about like Ray-Bans, then that's my bet that you will see a lot of mass adoption. That would be the type of thing they're aiming for. And so there's some headsets that are already getting close, actually, if you use the processing of your phone. So if you hook a cable to your phone, you can already they're just a little bit thicker than Ray-Bans actually, and they're otherwise they look like normal sunglasses, and they have whole other screens overlaid, so you can see in front of you everything, but there's also screens overlaid going on, and so it's not too far off, but it does still have a long way to go for sure.
Yeah, and I'm not sure the difference between the Quest 3 and the one Apple just released. But I mean, if we just even look at the cell phone, when the cell phones came out in the 80s, they were $1,000 to almost $4,000 in the 80s, and all you could do was call somebody. You couldn't even text.
Right.
And now, even with inflation, a brand new cell phone, if you're going to pay cash for an iPhone, it's like $1,500, but it's a literal fucking computer that can do
Bingo.
everything.
100%. It will be the same path in most tech that follows
Yeah.
that. It will definitely follow that. I imagine a lot of people could use a AR overlaid screen. Like even while we're talking right now, you could be talking and you could have that actual data shown to you. How many units did Quest 3 sell? And
Mm-hmm.
with a little bit of voice um, AI addition, I could say, show me a query on the data of the sales, and it would just, you wouldn't even have to type anything. It would just overlay it to you right there while we're talking. So super
See,
useful, definitely.
oh man, it's why we should buy two. And it's just like, how could we actually record our conversations in there where
Mm-hmm.
it's connected to some sort of AI API in the back end where it's literally just populating the information that we're talking about, coming up with the data, just like you were saying. As we're
Mm-hmm.
speaking, it's just in a window. So then you don't need to pay someone to go in and edit and put in all this data over your YouTube video, because people want to see sources, they want to see data.
Right.
And then you're actually paying a kid to go through finding that, putting it on your screen, editing, taking a whole day or two to edit your video when really it could just be auto populating as the conversation's going live. And then you can even correct yourself on the fly because it will say, oh, this happened in 1983, not 1985. The cost was 1,000, not 4,000, et cetera, et cetera.
Absolutely. It's like in that case with I'm sorry, it was actually 15 units in two batches, that kind of thing. And you would
Yes.
actually get the exact data. And the AI would be great at that. And then you combine that with overlays that you're seeing what's going on instead of like right now, if I had to do that, I had to look away. I have to look away at a laptop, totally breaking the whole structure of the setup. So for sure.
I think that's the future of podcasting right there, man.
It is. Yeah.
And it's like, And because how many people, I think the in person is the most ideal,
Mm,
but right after that, it's bar none. How many people can actually travel to interact with someone, regardless of who it is? Like the logistics of getting Lex Friedman, Ben Shapiro. Lex is in Texas, Ben Shapiro lives in Tennessee, and um, Destiny, I think Destiny said that he was in Nebraska but now lives in Florida. So it's like,
hmm
how did they get them all? Like, what was the logistics of everybody's calendars versus being able to use those headsets
right.
and the information that they were pointing out about whether there's a Middle East conflict in history, whether it was about Biden's economic plan versus Trump's economic plan, et cetera, could
hmm
auto populate in there, so you're actually seeing a live feed with data as they're talking. I mean, dude, that could be so cool.
It'd be pretty
We're
incredible.
gonna
You
have
know, you could see, you're talking about the Middle East and a graph of, Israel and the region shows up right next to you when you're talking and
Mhm.
highlights areas that you're talking about while you're talking about it. And the thing is that otherwise I'd have to look over to another screen. If it was overlaid, you'd be able to see as well. So you'd be able
Oh,
to see what's going on and you'll be able to be part of the conversation instead of have to break and see what's going on. Oh, whoops, the computer's got it wrong, actually. In this case, you'd see it real time and you'd totally be able to interface with it. So it has quite a few. The Quest Pro, the Vision Pro is actually selling a few points that is a similar thing of what you're saying. One is that it has cameras all within it and outside of it. So what it also wants to do is do things like you can record a memory. Say your kids open their Christmas presents on a couple years ago, and you're actually seeing the whole scene recreated, and you can actually see it in first person as if you were there. So it's
yeah.
like you said, the best thing is a first person real. But if you're a grandpa who lives far away, he can now experience his grandkids opening presents like he's there as much as possible. So the first thing, of course, is always, no matter what tech, is always going to be human interaction. It's simply how we're wired. But
Hmm.
these are great alternatives in those kind of cases when they're across the country and it just logistically doesn't make sense uh, to bring everybody together like that. And that's actually what one of their ads was literally this selling point. A lot of people, I mean, there's a uncomfortable creepiness factor to that, understandably, but I also can see the intent, and the intent would be exactly for that. A wheelchair bound a family member who, et cetera, across the country. You can give them a sense of being at home like they used to be as much as possible. And that was, I think, the intent, even if the delivery came off as kind of awkward for sure.
Yeah. No, it makes it, as long as I am all for advancements like this, as long as it just doesn't turn our population into like the people on Wally,
Mm. Hmm.
where they
Right,
were just all in wheelchairs because everything just did everything for them,
right,
and they lost their bone density. They're just blobs because they're getting just tubes of food. They can go to ancient Rome because they have the goggles on, and everyone's just in a wheelchair that just goes around and they experience things. I don't think that that'll ever happen really, but it's that far. What you know? I
for
guess it's
sure.
the
Reality is always a moderation. We always, in our
yeah.
minds as humans, we always predict the worst outcomes or the absolute best. And reality is more boring in that it usually is right in the middle. You'll have some that'll turn into blobs, and some already have turned into blobs, frankly.
Yeah, yeah,
Uh,
exactly.
so
Without any of it.
yeah, without
Yes.
any, without it was zero VR headsets, and yet there's still that are some that are, even though they have all these extra tech, they are still super fit and are even augmenting their tech, the tech using tech to be more fit. So
Oh
you
yeah,
have
like
both, yeah, both are gonna, and that's going to be the play no matter how advanced the tech is, 100 years from
I mean, look at Mark
now.
Zuckerberg and Jeff Bezos. Mark Zuckerberg talks about how he wakes up, he does jujitsu, he goes and surfs, and then he goes into the office.
Right.
It's like, so he's not, you could almost say like, Alice, you don't use your own supply, don't get high on your own supply. It's like he might be, creating these experiences for people, but it doesn't mean that that's how society has to go. And then you look at Jeff Bezos, that dude's probably has a more optimized blood panel today than he's ever had. He looks in freaking great shape.
He does, yeah. Wow, he could use that wealth to put to use to do it well instead of use the wealth to turn into a blob. And that's ultimately down to each individual, and always will, no matter the tech. Tech is simply a tool, and we often try to interject our own personalities or try to project our own insecurities onto tech.
Yeah.
Tech is not a living thing. It's simply a tool. You can use it good or you can use it bad.
Yes.
When I went to Ireland, being able to see an 800-year-old castle in VR would be super sick, but being able to actually be near it and put your hand on it it was an amazing experience. So that will never really ever be replaced, with the tech. But the tech sure helps when the cost and the difficulties of getting there. You could sure see a lot of it by putting on a headset and looking around at an 800-year-old castle. And it's pretty awesome. You could see it's pretty cool. It's almost like you're there. But it won't quite ever fully replace that. So I expect the same thing with any tech moving forward. You're going to have a halfway. Some will use it to great effect, and smartwatch is a good one where I'll be working on a computer and time just passes and slips away. And tech is useful in that the smartwatch will tell you to get up every hour.
Yeah.
And that's other things that otherwise I'd have to schedule my own alarms and regularly set alarms and all this extra work I'd have to do. And then otherwise I'd just say, hey, stand up because you've been sitting for an hour. That's super helpful. And certainly exactly, if anything, works against the Wally blob thing.
Yeah.
With that said, I wish we had a AR overlay because we're heading towards, I think it's 60% obese or overweight in the country. And I wish I had the exact figures because the ones I remember reading are so high that it almost seems wrong. And so I always keep doubting it, but I think it was 60, which is just astronomical. That's so insane, dude. Like I've always thought, 30% would be a high benchmark, but to see more than 50% of the country is, we're already blobs in terms of that respect. If we're talking about, we don't even need to go to Wally stage. We're often in many ways already there. So, yeah.
Dude, I made a video on how in 1985 it was only about 5% of children were obese, and now it's 25%.
Right.
And just how over the decades, how it just kept doubling and doubling. And it's just, so you're definitely onto something. And like you were saying, I hate to have to look away to just like look up stuff when you could have the overlay. That would just be so sweet. I think that's the future of the podcasting. We got to get 2 of those. That's where it makes sense and you justify buying one.
For sure. Yeah. And I'm sure there's exactly people that are doing that for their business right now. They picked one up just exactly for, they're working in a studio, maybe doing a car. They were talking about one example would be if you're designing certain mechanical things like cars and stuff, you can have things overlaid from your vision and make changes to the structure of the vehicle as you're looking at it. Super helpful because otherwise everyone has to go back to their screens and make changes and then view the changes. Otherwise, everyone could simultaneously at the same time be seeing changes on their headset and see how the design and work is going. And they're much more collaborative in theory. It could really work. I think the real augmentation booster will be have an AI right along there with it and being able to give it realistic voice commands, and then it can overlay that stuff to your screen, your headset. That would be just like we're talking about. Like, oh, could you bring up the US obese figures for 2020 and like, and it just would bring it up for you like that, and I don't have to turn away and type something. it would just overlay it. Man, that's when you're really going to see that AR VR tech be widely adopted, and people will be rocking them everywhere. You'll see like phones were when iPhones finally turned the corner. When phones finally turned into smartphones, suddenly you saw them everywhere. And there's always those moments in tech where it had been building up, as you said, from the 80s. I mean, that was decades before. And that's often with tech. You have a hype cycle, but expect that it might take decades. It depends on the tech, but it could take 10 years or 20 or even more. So, but once it does turn that corner, suddenly it's everywhere. And it's just like smartphones.
Dude, it was the guy who invented the BlackBerry. People literally told him no one's going to want a computer in their pocket.
Right. Exactly.
They
And I've heard
literally
that.
they told that guy, why would anyone want email on their phone? Why would anyone want a computer on their phone?
And in a counter kind of thought experiment, imagine your life without it now, and you'd have to go back to your home PC to look at your email every time. That would be maddening. So yeah, exactly. It's the same kind of thing. Why would I constantly be looking down at my phone and we're all looking at our phones instead of looking at each other, when I can look at you and I have information overlaid, but I can still look at you, and we're still having conversations, we're still communicating, but we're no longer having to have basically a wall in between us, which is our phone screens currently.
Mm-hmm.
That's why everybody's looking down at their phones. So it's a really cool VR and AR. Ironically, it's often portrayed like it's going to turn everybody into Wall-E. But what's kind of interesting about it, similar to what the guy was saying about BlackBerry, is it could actually free us from the phone screen.
Yeah.
And that's actually the ironically, because right now it seems like it's just building a wall between us. And there will be VR that will do that, of course. Like that totally immersive 3D thing requires this, in a sense, you're immersed from the outside world. But the AR is what I've always been excited about ever since this thing took off. And that's augmented reality. So you can still see all around you your environment, your real environment, but it's overlaid with information and screens and et cetera, et cetera. So that's, if anything, that'll free us from our phone screens, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, no, I like, we've both always said we've always been fans of advancement in technology.
For sure.
Because you could say in theory and in a free market, advancements in technology allow the standard of living to go up and the cost of living to go down. And you just got to figure out how that's going to, with this VR things, there will be a correlation where that happens in your life. Just time will be the one that tells us what those actual factors are.
Exactly. And we often associate today tech and stuff like that with just computer tech and the Zuckerbergs and, the Microsofts. Mm-hmm. But there's a really fascinating book that argues that the biggest advancements that created the biggest productivity gains came in the early 20th century to mid 20th century. And that's stuff like your washing machine, your dishwasher. People forget that we used to have to do all that by hand. So these are huge productivity gains that's freed up an enormous amount of free time that then is put to other use and has built the economy into what it is today. So you literally, we act like tech is just tech, but tech is also your washing machine. It's also your dishwasher. So
dude, it is such a good point, because you got to think of how much time, energy that it saves society, not just like women, from the time that they were just like taking care of the household. And then how those things haven't changed much, and they're still, they'll change on sort of a micro scale over the years, just being more efficient with water, more efficient with energy, etc. But it's just how important those are and how we still use them and we take them for granted, kind of like what you're saying, I believe.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly what I'm saying. We don't consider that tech anymore, like it's part of our lives, but that's still part of that same innovation cycle that we're talking about with AR. That still had to do with the dishwasher and all the tech that we now take for total granted, and in many ways, this a smartphone, we already take that kind of for granted in the same way.
I think we just take transportation. We've had cars for 100 years, and I think we take that for granted and where it's going. And as well, I mean, just prior to 100 years ago, how in the fuck did you travel very efficiently anywhere other than a train, which really only went one way, and then eventually another one went the other way?
Exactly. And I think you can see real quick, there's videos of people who ride the Amtrak today. And we often totally forget they have a top speed of what, maybe 35 miles an hour or stuff like that. Unless you're getting on an actual high speed rail, your trip from one area to another, it takes like 8 hours. And it's like from California to Northern California to Reno is like 6 hours or something like that. I think we were even thinking about taking the kids with us on a trip one time. And it was like all day. It would take all day to get there. So. Me
and Laura did that for Chance one year on his birthday. We
nice,
went from Reno to Truckee.
Awesome.
And you have to make it that thing that you don't do all the time, because it's like, well, we can just get up to Truckee from our house where we live in about 20 minutes.
Yeah.
So you got to be able to go downtown, wait in line, get your ticket, which is only like $8. But you get your ticket, you hope you got a good seat next to a window where you can see all the things. And then, you're taking like 3 hours to get up there. And then you get off. And only a spot where the train allows you to get off. You don't get to pick where you're going to park, like with a car.
Right.
And then, so I had to take my car up there the day before, drop it off, get a ride from a buddy back down. So that we just had a car to drive around and then come back when we wanted to.
Wow. See, and that underlines exactly what you're saying. The car was one of those tech developments like we're talking about. And now we completely take it for granted. It's no longer tech. But we all have to understand that the AR stuff is tech that will one day be taken for granted, like a car. But when the car first came out, it was the AR. It was the new thing. And people both hated it and loved it. And you'll always have that as well. There's many cases that thought the car was going to ruin everything and destroy society and et cetera, in a similar way that the tech of today is discussed in certain circles, as well as that people embrace it and think it's going to fix everything and solve everything. And reality is often more middle, more boring, and a mix of both. And
if you think about it, the combustion engine, our everyday car, that also hasn't changed. If you take the Model T and then you take, I don't know, just a Honda Accord, they are vastly different. But from over the years, there hasn't been a ton that's really, really changed. Kind of like your dishwasher. So we just kind of take them for granted. We want new models.
We don't consider it's new tech.
Yeah, we don't.
Yeah.
But then you got guys like Elon who are taking the same concept, making it its internals different, and pretty soon, people will be me and you will be sitting face to face in a Tesla, having a meeting or doing a podcast while we're going somewhere, because it's being automated and driving on its own, and there'll be this trust in society that you don't need to be having your hands on the steering wheel, foot ready on the brake, because it's going to do it on its own. It'll be completely automated. Right. And we're probably there's going to be fear. We talked about this a little bit last week, I think. Mm-hmm. There's going to be the fear initially, because they're going to say, oh, one of them went fucking wild and hit a girl on a lady on a bicycle, and then it drug her 20 feet. And it's like, well, but are we going to get rid of this progression in technology because of a boo-boo?
Right.
It's like we can't, because think about in the next 50 years when we look back, and it's like, okay, these automated cars, there's less wrecks. It doesn't allow for drunk driving. We're able to be as humans more productive. So then maybe you almost take the 8-hour work week down to 6, because you're working inside your car, able to be productive inside of your car.
Right.
Versus taking that time for travel and then like lunch breaks. And the human brain really only can be optimized and as efficient as possible for more of a 5 to 6 hour period than 8 or 10 hour work periods. I feel like the data on that's been like pretty clear, but businesses don't want to look at that. They just want to be like, well, can you do a 10-hour work week or an 8.5? There's really not 8 hour work week, right? Work days. Sorry, there's 8.5 hour days or
Right.
10.5 hour days. Or even when you get there in some laws, you have to take 2 breaks, so then you're an 11-hour day. But it's like if we're able to work in your car, be doing efficient stuff because it's being completely automated, we can't just let a boo-boo hinder those things.
Right. I mean, you nailed it exactly where, and that's been so many cases. That's been the case. The emergence of air flight, where we have consumer commercial air flights. Did not many of the first crash and burn? Oh, yeah, they did. And also with trains detonating, going off the rails. How many train crashes in the 1860s
Yeah.
and after were? So we just have to have the balls to keep at it. And once it's reliable, I can totally see you actually check in with your boss once you get into your vehicle and the thing's already taking you to work, but you're already interfacing with people at work and you've already begun your day shift in the vehicle. And that saves up productivity that we now waste literally just getting to there and back there. And there's that famous figure about how much people end up spending of their lives in commutes. And
Yes.
that shit's terrible. That's terrifying. That's a horrible thing that we just totally toss away, don't even consider that we're wasting a huge section of our lives just waiting in
Yes.
the car. That's ridiculous.
Exactly. We should be spending our time with our family, with sleep, and then being productive humans. Not you're in your car, you're getting shitty sleep, you don't see your family because you're trying to be productive in
Yeah.
society. It's like we kind of got to get some of these different things reworked. And with advancements in technology, I mean, it's really how we can actually, as a society, live a more prosperous life because we have more time on our hands and
That's
are
right.
still able to be just as efficient, if not
What,
more efficient.
often it's not just the boomers, but it's often every generation has their group of people that think all tech in the future is going to be dystopian. But if anything, some of these are going to really help quality of life. Instead of being in a
Yep.
commute, you could actually have your family with you and you could be talking to them. You could be getting stuff done in your vehicle instead of your only focus needs to be on the road. And that is
Yeah.
all that time of your life that's now taken away from everything besides the road. And imagine being that freed
Exactly.
up. You're looking around, you're talking, you could have chats with your family and actually chat with them and help them play checkers or something and actually be able to
Yeah.
look at them because you can't take your eyes off the road. You have to look at, you have to really focus the whole time. So a whole bunch of our lives just spent focusing on the road. Is that we don't realize often it's in a way that you could spin it. That's rather dystopian now. So wouldn't we want
Yep.
to improve? Wouldn't we want to improve it for a better future where we can actually do that? And the key to that would be reliability. One thing I always said that's interesting, I've always been fascinated about LiDAR, is the average human reaction time is give or take with a few milliseconds, about 1 second. So something shoots out in front of you, you have give or take about 1 second reaction time. And that's the time from your brain to send the signals of your eyes information to send the signals and your body to react to those signals, right? This would be great again to have the AR overlay, but I believe it's about 50 times a second is the LiDAR's ability to do that same reaction time. So we're talking about a significantly increased reaction time. The key of the technology right now is being able to discern whether that's a fire extinguisher or a kid. That's and
Yeah.
that's there's a word for it, but I can't recall at the moment. But being able to detect what is where the tech needs work, and they're working on it. But in terms of reaction time, there's really no comparison. That will be a significant upgrade from our current setup in terms of reaction and saving lives when things dart out in front of our vehicles. So that's, if anything, that'll be great. Once it can actually interpolate what's happening, I'd feel actually significantly safer in one that's self-driving. because its reaction time is
Yep.
significantly greater. And of course, if you add alcohol in there, your reaction time goes down quite a bit,
Oh yeah.
so, and hence all the
And,
accidents and fatalities.
and here's one of the things where I want to put the trust in in any of the older generation that thinks we're going to be living in the Terminator or Matrix era, or even the young generation who think people like Elon are just evil and want to make as much money
Right.
and they're going to get us to buy their cars. The amount of technology and data that Tesla is consuming by people buying their cars and them being one of the best-selling sedan vehicles in the United States right now
Right.
is that they're going to be acquiring billions and billions of hours and or miles
Right.
to where that there ends up being no flaws. I'm not going to say no, but the probability is zero that there's going to be no flaws in their system because of the amount of miles and hours they'll be putting in by people just driving them like normal, not automated, because they're able to collect all that data, put it into the base, and test and work their automated driving off this. And it's like, so it's why I tell people, you are not only helping Tesla by purchasing or leasing a car right now that's not automated, you are ensuring the future safety of the driving in our country by doing so. Because Ford's not putting cameras and collecting this data in their cars. GMC, GM, they're not doing it. Nobody else is doing this except Tesla. They
Right.
were smart enough to day one make sure they're collecting this data for the future.
Exactly. I couldn't have said any better. The real world data is, remember, we're talking about that interpolation of detecting if it's a fire hydrant or not.
Mm-hmm.
The real world data and huge amounts of it is what's going to train these models to figure it out, to finally figure it out and get it down to where you have a 99 percentile thing. And, we often forget, and I think that's an important part of this conversation, is people are not going to accept it until it's 100%. Well, there's nothing in reality that's 100%.
No.
It's literally, it'll never get 100%. And your own driving is never 100%. There's crashes, and have you ever never wrecked in your entire life? Well, if you haven't,
Yeah.
if you have even once did a fender bender, then you're not 100% either. So you can't expect anything in reality to do the same. But if we can get it down to an acceptable amount of interpolation, like it can 97% of the time always figure out it's a fire hydrant or a young kid running across the road every time. It's a dog. It can detect exactly every time down to a percentage that's acceptable. That is going to require the real world data that you're talking about. And what's so great about America is I think we should always have the freedom to choose to share our data, but you have to, you put it well that you could help your fellow Americans and help your fellow human beings by sharing that data, because it's going to allow the model to train faster. More data, faster learning. But the great thing is, though, is unlike China or others, you can choose whether to share it or not. So I say, hey, give them the chance to not share it if you want. If they don't want to share it, fine. That's your choice. That's your freedom to do so. But consider sharing your data when it makes sense, like that. The social media data, that could be more debatable, in terms of your own behaviors and habits, but we're talking about your driving data. So that's a little different, that's quite a different, you can't compare all data sharing to the same thing. There's different circumstances that are better or worse and can apply and cannot apply. And with driving data, that will help that machine learn faster how to figure out what's going on. And the sooner they figure that out, the sooner you can take your eyes off the road and start focusing on your job at work, focusing on talking to your kids and actually spending time with them while we're transporting from one to the other. Let's free up our eyes on the road. And part of that's going to be, and that's what's often lost in these dystopian future tech debates, is that how much this stuff can actually help free us from stuff we're already chained to right now. And we don't even think about it. Like, we just been driving on, like, commuting, spending like a third of our lives in the car. And we didn't even, it's so ingrained, we don't even consider it, like how dystopian that is. We're like, oh yeah, it's fine. We make it work.
So ingrained. That is, yep, dude. We are so ingrained. It's normalized
It's
that
normalized.
this is just part of society, part of how we're supposed to live our lives. But it's not.
It doesn't have
It's
to be that way.
no.
It does not have to be that way. It could be so much better. And like any tech I've ever seen, it's a double-edged sword, and it'll create weird dystopian things, but it also create really cool new opportunities. And I think we just talked about the new opportunities that it's going to create,
Yeah.
and as well. So we'll allow people to even more be blobs. They don't even have to like focus on the road. They can just roll themselves into the car and just fucking sit there and just but yes, it will
Yep.
do that too. But yeah, for sure.
But like we were saying, it'll also let the other group of people who choose to just be productive
Oh,
sit facing the people who are in the back. All of us are facing each other, playing checkers on the way to take our kids to elementary school. You
exactly.
know, you're maybe you don't have kids or it's not your day to drop them off, and you're doing all your emails before you even get in the office. You've answered to 40 different emails. You know, you've already done a half hour, depending if you live in LA, almost 2 hours worth of work in your
Easily.
car to get into the office to check in. Go, everybody. You have a shorter work day because of that productivity. On the way home, you're doing X, Y, Z, whatever that is, and it's beneficial. You can either buy a Tesla Model X, opt in to share your data, opt out to share your data, or you can buy a Chevy Equinox where the NSA is fucking taking your data. You don't even know it, and there's no benefit to society of that data going out to them, which you didn't authorize.
And
Your
since they didn't
choice.
install the cameras in the right places, they can't even collect
Yeah.
accurate data anyways. So they can't even
Yeah.
get the right data anyway. So, and I was even thinking about what you're saying during that time is like Laura would say she'd have to go somewhere on the freeway in LA and then go somewhere else. And there's an hour there, 45 minutes there. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
Imagine easily within reason, you got some barbells. Now you're literally doing some of your workouts instead of going to the gym after there. You're literally on your way home. You're on a inclined bike. You're doing some actual dumbbells right in the car.
Yeah.
These are the kind of things. These are the kind of things. Yes, it's going to create drug addicts who could just roll and people who could just roll themselves and be even more incompetent. Yes, it'll enable that. It's an enabler for that, but it's also an enabler for somebody to hop in their vehicle. It'll take you where you need to go, and you're literally doing dumbbell workouts
And so,
in the
as a
vehicle.
free society, if someone wants to be this alcoholic drug addict, that is up to their choice. The
Right.
thing about a free society is you cannot um, impede on someone else's freedoms. Therefore, if you're getting in your automated driving car, there's zero chance of you getting in a drunk driving accident and imposing your drunk lifestyle on an innocent civilian.
Exactly, and that's a great opportunity. That's a great opportunity to talk about the freedom aspect. Those drunk drivers are imposing their problems on others, and it's one thing if you got your own, you're making your own problems your own problem, but you are. I mean, how many lives have been wrecked by that?
Dude,
That's
I
something
mean,
we would significantly fix.
I'm
Significantly.
sure we've known people in our lives who've been functional alcoholics who will just drive intoxicated, never get in an accident. But it's what if they just didn't have a blinker on and got pulled over? What if they rolled through a stop sign and
Right.
then just how that impacts that DUI impacts their life? When it's
Oh
like,
yeah.
oh, we're just in a totally automated car. So not even talking about the alcoholic who is just blacked out belligerent who's going to get in an accident at some point, but there are people in today's society who are functioning addicts.
Functioning addicts, and they impose problems on others, and they also wreck their own life by their decision. And as we've talked about before, we've normalized this whole thing. But is that not
Yeah.
super? It's fairly dystopian if you actually think about it. Imagine an alternative where you can go to the bar, enjoy the company of your friends, and make it safely home, and not have to depend on a sober driver. That's freeing. All of you guys can drink together. How many times does a sober guy have to put up with everyone else for the night? And we have that
Mm-hmm.
classic scenario. Now everyone can partake as friends and you all go home safely. That is less dystopian than the current environment that we've normalized. And we don't
Yeah.
even think twice about it. We don't even think,
Or the girl who gets the drink at the bar with her friends and because someone's going to say, well, get a fucking Uber. It's like,
Right.
well, what about it? I know it's the exception and it's more than an anomaly, but the girl who accidentally got in the wrong car,
Right.
thinking it was an Uber, was intoxicated and then was murdered, because that's literally happened.
It's literally happened,
It's
and
like,
enough times to be concerned. And you're at the end of
yeah,
the day, you're literally getting a car with a stranger. At the end of the day, it's just it opens up circumstances and situations that could you not would it not be better to avoid them altogether? It certainly makes sense to me.
yes, I got an Uber story for you.
Mhm.
I was in Albuquerque, New Mexico. I put in Uber. It's a Ford Explorer white that is on my app, and it's a girl named like Sherry.
Right.
White Ford Explorer, matching license plate pulled up. Did not look like a Sherry. It was a dude.
Wow.
So I get in, and he
Creepy.
said Sherry was actually his girlfriend,
Hmm.
and he was running some Ubers for her. This dude was like, because we had to get on the freeway, we had to get out of this neighborhood and go to the hotel, because I was he picked me up from a Whole Foods.
Right.
And so I Ubered to a Whole Foods. I had to get another Uber back to my hotel. So you had to get on the freeway. He was driving fucking crazy. Like, fucking wild for having someone in your car who's a stranger,
Right.
and you're an Uber running it under your girlfriend's Uber license. He was driving fucking wild. I think I didn't do a complaint. I gave him a tip. It's just habit. I give everybody a tip. You can
Right.
see I have perfect 5-star rating on Uber. Anyone who wants to go check.
For sure.
But anyone else, I think 9 out of 10 people would have complained. Would have been like, one, it wasn't Sherry, it was fucking Billy.
Right.
And 2, he looked like he was fucking a little skinny crackhead kid. And 3, he was speeding like a motherfucker.
Right.
And you could even rent these automated cars, automated Teslas in another city, so you don't have to rely on an individual driver. It would be no different than an Uber, just automated.
And that's the future that we're opening up. There's times when
Yeah.
random strangers isn't with human interactions isn't necessarily a better thing. And the first thing that came to my mind is thankfully he didn't seem to be that way. But if you're some weirdo pedo piece of shit, you could say, women would feel more comfortable having a woman driver, and then this guy shows up and he's a guy, and that could lead to those
Yeah.
situations where he could take advantage of that situation if he's some weirdo like that. And you're creating all these circumstances that you would simply avoid. You would simply clear the fog if you had the thing drive you home. It's that simple.
Dude, I remember him
That's
either
crazy.
running a stop sign or a stoplight,
Right.
and when he realized he did it, he just did one of these like, oh, my bad. Just like
Crazy.
so nonchalant about it. And I was just like, oh fuck. And I was really glad there wasn't a lot of other cars during this time of the day
Right.
on the road. But yeah, it was like, fuck, dude. Like,
And an interesting
come
thing
on.
about the AI tech is that if the interpolation, the detecting misinterprets, it's one thing. But if it detects that it's a stoplight, it's always going to stop at a stoplight. Humans can choose to blow right through a stoplight. That's the whole
Yes.
thing. They can choose. The computers don't have that kind of option. You're going to have the type of safety that we simply don't have right now. If you're going to drive with a stranger who just chooses to blow past a red light, there is none of that in that. If it might misdetect it, like I said, there's nothing perfect, but it's not going to on purpose say, "Oh, my bad," and just
Oh, my bad. My bad,
and,
dog.
and fly right through a stoplight, potentially putting not only yourself in danger and him, but also the people you collide with.
Exactly.
Crazy. So these are the kind of things we've totally normalized. We don't even pay it a second thought. But if you give it a second thought, they're fairly dystopian right now. So why don't we improve that and make that better in our lives? And a big way to do that would be ones that could drive you home. So many cases that we've even had, the wedding and everything else. If you had a driver, you could spend more time hanging out together at the bar and stuff,
Yeah.
and then get drove home, and everyone would still make it home relatively safe and sound. And it's times that's like that just we're just normalizing them. We don't even think twice about it. You just have to suffer the consequences now, right now.
Did you drive back with us in the Tesla at
I
my
did,
wedding?
yeah, yeah, oh yeah, for sure, yeah.
Is that
That
when we
was
were bumping that music and speeding way too fast?
for sure.
Okay.
Perfect example. For example, so we
No,
could
we're
be
not.
we could all be an automated one. We would be sure
Yes,
we'd be bumping the music, but it would be safely driving us at exactly the right correction,
dude.
legally approved speeds, and we'd just get there home safe.
Oh my gosh, yes. For those of you who don't know, at my wedding, a bunch of us piled in a Tesla Model X. So I
Mhm.
felt safely, very safe.
For sure, for sure.
But
The
the person
driver,
driving, one of my relatives, was intoxicated. It was this person's car. And it
exactly.
was like freaking the Formula One Indy 500 with great music just blasting.
That's exactly
Oh
right.
my.
That's where the
Yes,
choices. That's where the AI doesn't get to choose to speed or blow through stoplights, or if it can interpret the right thing, it's going to do that as it's coded to do. And humans, though, they can just decide like, oh, we're on a 35-mile-an-hour road. Let's gas it. Let's see if we can get up to 60 or whatever.
exactly. It's 1 in the morning. There's no one here. We'll
Yeah,
we'll we'll
exactly.
just race.
And
Yeah,
in that time, we could even be more partying and having the beats going in the car on our way home instead, while it's safely driving us, and we could totally ignore the whole circumstances. So
it
I find it very freeing. I think the idea of it's really freeing, actually.
it's very freeing, and I think I hope that our listeners
Mm.
or listener, if there's only one of them out there,
Hmm.
understands the concept that you are saying is that the technology isn't going to mess up in the sense that a human has a choice. Like there's
Right,
a massive fucking difference.
right,
Human, if there's a stoplight, a stop sign, a speed limit, there is going to be no flaw in that aspect.
right. And
You
that's
know,
where, like in physics, that's what I'm talking about. We need to get to a benchmark. So if 97% of the time the AI can detect it's a stop sign, it's always going to stop. But 97% of the time, a human doesn't have to choose to stop at a stoplight. And that's the interesting thing that we've normalized and we're totally cool with. And we accept it as kind of the risks of vehicle driving now.
yeah,
And these are those things that we just need to get it to a benchmark where it's at an acceptable level of highness. Now, there's going to be a couple times it might not detect the stoplight, and then it'll go through the stoplight. But the AI is not going to say, "Oh, I see the stoplight, and I'm going to go through it anyways." That's the difference.
mhm,
Right now,
yeah,
that's what humans do. We do that.
yeah. There's not going to be like, oh, the owner of my car really has to get to this meeting, so we're just going to kind of,
That kind of thing. Hmm.
fudge the numbers a little bit today.
For
There's just
sure.
not that an option. And one of the things about um, high traffic incident areas
Mm.
in each city, they tend to be in the same areas because you have a high number of cars all coming in, um, coming across each other, like an intersection
That makes sense.
of different highways,
Mm.
and it's that there's so much traffic that they're always trying to fudge the lights, and then
Right.
people are timing lights in various things like that, and
Another great
it
example.
eliminates that. It
And
eliminates that.
that eliminates that exact kind of pushing the limit on the red lights and everything that everyone always does. Exactly.
Yeah,
It's going to play by the rules every time. And
you
that's where
know,
yeah,
if there's 1,000 accidents in one city in a month, it's not scattered. It is they are usually majority of them are centrally located around a certain intersection, and then you'll have maybe 30 scattered throughout the city, and 70% will be in like two major areas that there's these major intersections, and then it just wipes those out.
that's a really good example. I didn't even think of that actually.
Yeah,
That's a great because that often happens. And how many times do we push the limit on the yellow light, and that thing
yeah,
simply won't do that. It just simply doesn't. That's not its whole thing. What's also fascinating that got me thinking about that is, what is insurance but pooled risk? So you're all pooling your money together to reduce risk. Well, guess what? What if the amount of claims goes way down? Then by de facto, your insurance should go down. So you're actually going to
yes,
be increasing everyone's profitability and insurance affordability by not having everyone push the limits around these hotspot zones. So, I mean, there's lots of knock-on effects that are going to also happen that we can't even foresee right now at the moment. But that's just one that came to mind, is literally all those incidents right now that are claims that have to be damages that have to be paid for on the insurance fund. That's going to free up money right there, and that's going to lower the cost for everybody.
And there's going to be options. You're going to hop into your car, and it's going to say, Jesse, are we going on your? It's going to assume my routine to go to the gym at whatever time, and let's say I'm going 3 hours later because my child was sick or something.
Right.
It'll say, are you, I'm assuming you can go to the gym. Would you like to go your normal route? Because if we go on this route, it'll be quicker due to traffic at this time.
Exactly.
Or, you know what? Can we take this route because I like the scenery?
Mm-hmm.
And it's going to, no problem. And it's going to give you options. Do you want a normal route, the fastest route? Do you want this longer route, less traffic, less stop and go? And it's that stuff is going to take even more stress that we have, that's unconscious stress, that we're just like in the stop and go of traffic,
Exactly.
And there's just going to be a lot of easing on our lives, which, I think we're going to take for granted, but people are going to really appreciate it initially. And then it's going to be that in 50 years, people are like, what do you mean you guys just like stressed out in the car and you guys couldn't do anything? Because there's going to be generations that
live that way.
Yeah.
I can even tell you, from moving from Reno at the 5 o'clock hour to here, you just find yourself, I now realize I would just find myself like the equivalent of gritting your teeth when you're in the stop and go. We don't even have to do all that. That's our just focusing. We're constantly using energy to focus on the road, and the brain is reacting accordingly. Imagine freeing all that stress up. Like, you're literally just freeing all that extra stress that we normalize right now. We put it on ourselves, and we have to do it as par for the course. But what if you didn't have to do that? The generations in the future will be like, I can't even believe you guys lived like that. That's so crazy. You guys did that to yourselves every day. That's crazy.
And when cars there's going to be a certain scale that when we have X% of cars that are automated, it will literally get rid of traffic. Because people don't understand that traffic isn't because of the number of cars. Traffic is because there was someone who merged or was merging on or off, who was on their brakes too hard.
Right.
And then it can be a half mile, quarter mile, half mile, or mile back. That's where all the cars had to stop because of someone's their on ramp, off ramp, and not keeping with the flow of traffic. And if you look, it always ends up happening far back where then it's just a habit of everyone having to hit their brakes, everyone slowing down, and then they're freeing up. But then it continues to go behind them, where people are being forced to slow down, and then people will speed back up.
I had heard that there's like
an aerial view, and you like watch it frame by frame, and you can speed it up. You can see, it started way up here, and then back here is a
boom, boom, and it had knock-on effects all the way down the line.
Yeah.
I think I remember reading something about there's like even mathematical formulas they use for traffic planning, and it's often caused by some granny staying through a green too long and early, and having knock-on effects all the way down the line to somebody hitting the brakes too soon and too hard, causing further disruptions. And these kind of mathematical formulations that cause disruptions down the line will be greatly smoothed out by an AI that's now coordinating together. And of course, you can definitely imagine, once each one can detect on its own autonomously, then of course, why wouldn't you also map as many together as they can, so they can even further coordinate together? Like a flock of birds, they'll be coordinating together and literally just gliding through traffic, just gliding. It'd be lovely.
And they will. And one of the things that Tesla is going to do is, if there's 20, 30 Teslas on the freeway, there's going to be some sort of communication because of their routes, where they're able to just weave it seamlessly in between each other to get off, get on, and
Exactly.
there's no anticipating. Are they going to accelerate onto this on ramp? Because I got to get on
Exactly.
the off ramp, or should I accelerate? Oh fuck! Oh, and then someone
How
hits the
often do
brakes
we?
to let the
Yeah,
other one on.
exactly, dude. Totally. How often do we do that exact thing in driving? We don't know what the other guy's gonna do, so we're like waiting to. Yeah, dude. Totally none of that. There's none of that. There's a flock of birds right now. We're just barely. We're like a hive of bees or something, stepping on each other constantly. So
A
it's
pissed off
chaotic.
beehive.
A pissed off beehive, and we don't turn signal and anticipate, and we stay in the lanes too long, anticipating what the other driver is going to do. It's crazy. It's totally crazy,
Yeah,
and we don't even
I
think
can't
about it.
wait
It's
till
normalized.
I can't wait till kids read in the history books. It'd be like, road rage was a thing. You guys
You
road
guys,
raged.
you guys are crazy, and we can
What
stop the car
wackos?
and scream at each other. Like the computer won't let you stop, so you'll just keep going, and your little anger incident will pass instead of turning into a huge drama that changes and wrecks lives. So it's so many knock-on effects. So many, you could see that really we've normalized quite a rough thing, and calling that normal. And everyone's always fearful of the future and what it brings, but there's ways of looking at it where it doesn't have to be like that. There's
Mm-hmm.
this exercise today was a this talk today was a kind of exercise in thinking about it on another angle. So pretty cool.
Yeah.
I'm excited about it. I think it's really interesting, and I think ultimately is it's going to be freeing. Uh, there's only the thing is that you can hop on the road and drive yourself, and I get that, but think about how many bonuses you're going to get from freeing yourself up from that. So ultimately, I think that's going to outweigh any benefits of hopping in your roadster and cruising the roads. And I get that, but um, you know,
No,
everything
I agree.
it's a double-edged sword. You never get anything for free, of course. So
I think this is a prime spot to cut it off. Otherwise, if we jump to any other topic, it will be another hour.
for sure, any other that's a great segment to cut it, because the one thing I can say is that the Q4 came in for Tesla and it's rough. But I think this is overall that the money biting is finally biting. People are just buying less stuff, So it's ultimately it's not necessarily sales for Tesla. It's more just that big ticket items everyone's pulling back. The Fed raising rates is finally really starting to buy everybody. Credit card debt and et cetera, et
Yeah.
cetera. There's just less money. So once that changes, that dynamic changes, people will be buying them up again for sure. No question in my mind.
Yeah.
And yeah,
We gotta eventually support Mr. Elon.
for sure. Yeah, I'm definitely always thinking about how I can do it. And one of the
You
ways
have Tesla
is
stock?
I do have Tesla stock.
Yeah,
Not
dude.
a
I
lot.
think
Yeah.
I tell everyone like
Mhm.
if I don't, I'm like I don't know, man. If I knew what stocks were going to be the greatest,
For sure.
I would be in a whole different part of my life. But Elon is one guy who you just should never bet against. And I think
Right.
I tell everyone like I would just buy Tesla stock if I was going to give you one to do. Why not Tesla?
The thing about stock investing that drives me insane, and most people with any kind of common sense, is that you're so focused on the quarterly numbers. You're not seeing the bigger picture. And
Yeah,
his ability to get things done, that would be a bad thing to bet against, because the amount of
yeah,
things he's been able to say that they said it was impossible, and he's been able to achieve, he's been able to pull it off. Also, the one other thing with Tesla is that it's unlike GM, which if you're just talking about car margins, that's one thing. But Tesla makes and does a whole lot more than just cars. So
yeah,
that's something to consider as well. When you're investing in Tesla, you're investing more than just in a car company. They do make the majority of the revenue in cars right now, but they also do a lot of other things that GM doesn't even dabble in. So
yeah,
something to consider, AI all the way to energy, like the power banks. I mean, if you were to reduce greatly the cost of battery manufacturing, the power banks would be fantastic. Even if you don't have solar panels in your house, imagine if you have some power banks, the power goes out for a couple hours like it often does in the rural areas like this, but you just had a power bank that it would switch to and use while you need it. That's like, boom, I would absolutely buy one. No question. And Tesla makes some of the best power banks that there is. And so they already have make them. It's just that right now they can't make them at the scale that would really be transformative because of the cost of battery manufacturing. Well, guess what?
Mhm.
Guess what Tesla's doing? They're working hard on lowering battery manufacturing right now.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. I agree.
boom.
I'm gonna hit stop, and I think we got